Hello and welcome. We're about to jump into a really fascinating and kind of complicated question from Northeast Asian history. Basically, when does sharing a family tree stop mattering and a hard national border begin? It's all about these blurry lines between family and foreigner, a story told through this ancient group of peoples known as the Dongyi. Think about it for a second. Imagine the person living next door is actually a distant relative. Do you treat them like family? Or are they just another neighbor, maybe even a rival you're competing with? It sounds simple, but when you're both eyeing the same piece of land, that shared bloodline gets real complicated, real fast.
And you see, for the ancient kingdoms of Korea, we're talking Gojoseon, Goguryeo, Silla, this wasn't some thought experiment. It was their reality, every single day. They were surrounded by powerful states, and guess what? A lot of them came from the exact same ancestral stock. So figuring out who was a friend and who was an enemy, well, that was anything but simple.
Okay, so let's start by unpacking that ancient family tree. To really get why there were so many conflicts, you first have to understand the connections. And that means we need to get to know a really important group of people. And that term is the Dongyi. Now, you gotta remember, this was a label used by the Han Chinese. It was kind of a broad, catch-all name for all the different tribes and states to their east. So it wasn't one unified nation, not at all, but a whole bunch of different peoples who just happened to share a similar cultural and geographic space.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. Look at who falls under this massive umbrella. You've got the ancestors of modern Koreans, of course, Gojoseon and Goguryeo. But you've also got the Xianbi, the Khitan, and, get this, the Jurchens, who would eventually go on to found China's very last imperial dynasty, the Qing. That is one seriously influential and sprawling family tree.
And hey, this isn't just some modern theory we're piecing together. This is a direct quote from an official Qing dynasty historical record. They themselves wrote down that people from the Korean kingdom of Silla were right there at the beginning, helping to found their state. It just goes to show you how fluid these lines were. People were moving, migrating, and integrating across what we now think of as hard national borders. So if they were all family, in a sense, you'd think they'd all get along, right? Maybe form some kind of big Dongyi alliance? Well, history tells a very, very different story. And this slide just perfectly lays out the contradiction. On one hand, you have this shared history. The Jurchens, for example, used to be part of older Korean kingdoms like Goguryeo and Balhae. But on the other hand, the political reality was just brutal, constant warfare. When the battle lines were drawn, that whole idea of being fellow Dongyi just completely vanished. They were just the enemy, plain and simple. This chart makes it crystal clear. If you actually look at who the Korean dynasties of Goguryeo and Joseon were fighting the most, it wasn't the Han Chinese dynasties. Nope. The vast majority of their biggest, most destructive wars were with their supposed relatives, the Khitan, the Jurchens, you name it. The biggest threats they faced were, for all intents and purposes, family feuds. So why, right? Why were they fighting their cousins more than they were fighting total outsiders? Well, the answer has a lot less to do with their family tree and everything to do with a map. You see, for these super ambitious northern powers, like the Khitan or the Jurchens, the ultimate prize was always China's fertile heartland. That's where the resources were. But you can't launch a huge invasion like that if you're constantly worried about someone attacking you from behind. So step one was always the same: neutralize the Korean peninsula. Secure your flank, protect your supply lines. The wars weren't personal, they were pure strategy. This quote just nails it. For any state, survival comes first, period. It didn't matter if your neighbor was a fellow Dongyi or Han Chinese. What mattered was their location on the map and how powerful they were. At the end of the day, proximity and power beat ancient, shared bloodlines every single time. But here's a clever twist. Even as they were fighting their neighbors, Korean dynasties were really smart about using their shared past to their advantage. Whenever a new dynasty came to power, they would often adopt the name of an older, legendary kingdom to sort of claim its legacy. So the Goguryeo dynasty deliberately called itself Goguryeo to link back to the powerful Goguryeo Empire. And then, hundreds of years later, the Joseon dynasty reached even further back, all the way to the original Gojoseon. It was a brilliant political move, a way to create this sense of an unbroken, legitimate history. So what's the big takeaway here? What does all of this mean for us today? Well, this whole journey into the past reveals a really powerful truth about history itself. It's not just what happened, It's about the story we choose to tell.
See, history isn't just a boring list of facts and dates. It's a narrative. It's a story. And that story is always, always told by someone with a purpose in mind, whether it's to build a national identity, to justify a border, or to claim that you're the rightful heir to some ancient glory. The lines we draw between us and them are often way more about our needs today than they are about the distant past.
And you might be really surprised who uses this kind of history. Get this. This is a quote from Mao Zedong back in 1963. He's openly acknowledging that a region in modern-day China was once the territory of ancient Korea. It just shows you how these ancient histories are still alive, still echoing in modern politics and conversations about identity and territory. So this all leaves us with one last big question to think about. The story of the Dongyi shows us that the neat, clean national histories we learn in school are often, well, a lot messier in reality. And it forces us to ask, what stories does our own history choose to tell? And maybe more importantly, what inconvenient, complicated family ties are we choosing to leave out?